Good morning, and welcome to the First Unitarian Congregation of Ottawa. My name is Justine, and I'm the treasurer at the board at FirstU. It's good to be with you. If you are new to FirstU and would like to learn more about us, please contact us through our email at welcome@firstunitarianottawa.ca. Following our service at 11:30 a.m., please join us for our virtual hospitality hour. You may find the Zoom link on our website at firstunitarianottawa.ca or in our weekly email newsletter, the EUU. It is more important than ever to sign up to receive the EUU and to check our Facebook page and web page for notices and updates. Our online calendar is as full as ever. If you are expecting emails related to FirstU and are a Rogers Yahoo customer, please check your spam folder to see if any firstunitarianottawa.ca emails are there. If you find them, please mark them as not spam, and the email should start going to your inbox once again. We are looking for people with experience and interest to join the Finance Committee. You can spend some time with me. Please contact me if you are interested in becoming a finance member. Mark your calendar for the upcoming virtual campus development town hall on Saturday, March 13th, and learn about potential projects on our campus. I'm excited to report that bidding is now open for FirstU's online auction. There are beautiful and practical items to bid on, so please go to our website and search auction to find the links to instructions and the catalog. Finally, if you are unable to attend our congregational visioning session and have perspectives on our congregation's future you would like to share, please be in touch. Whatever your heritage, whatever your faith, whomever you love, and however you identify, today you are part of our spiritual community.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sharmila, and I am delighted to be your worship associate this morning. Although we find ourselves in separate places, here we are together, online, listening, connecting, and soon singing. As mentioned, do look at our Facebook page, website, and weekly EUU emails for information about all the happenings in our congregation. Some announcements to highlight. Coming up on Thursdays, March the 4th and 18th at noon, there will be conversations with community leaders from across Turtle Island to explore what it means to re-center anti-racism and Indigenous knowledge in climate action in relation to the work of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. A link can be found in last Friday's EUU. Do check out a video from the FirstU and UU Fellowship of Ottawa intern, Ian Hill. Their report will speak to what they have done for the first part of their internship and their plans for the second half. Each week, the EUU lists the Environmental Action Group's EnviroBits and actions. Here are some highlights. Last week, Reverend Pat spoke of ways we might eat mindfully. Check out the Enviro Action inviting you to mindfully lower your carbon footprint around food and participate in our Now to Earth Day Week food challenge. The challenge began last week with having one or more meat-free days. Week 2 challenges you to eat one or more meals of plant-based protein. It's not too late to start the challenge now. There will be prizes. Keep your challenge sheets until Earth Day week. Maybe the weather feels like hot beef stew. Instead, try our EnviroBite recipe, almond butter vegan stew. Look to the EUU or the Climate Confrontation page on the FirstU website. Another highlight. Support the Ontario Clean Air Alliance in their push to phase out gas-fired power in Ontario by 2030 by sending a letter to provincial leaders. And the final highlight is that you will find a link to the Enviro Action Survey. Those are the announcements. Please help me welcome our minister, the Reverend Patricia Guthmann-Haresch. And Julia and Gareth are technical support, and you will soon hear from Reverend Ellen Bell. Bonjour, welcome everyone. As we are honoring Black History Month today, before we light the chalice, I will read the end of the poem, Praise Song for the Day. And this was written for the first U.S. Black American President, Barack Obama, for the first inauguration by the African American scholar and poet Elizabeth Alexander. Say it plain, that many have died for this day. Sing the names of the dead who brought us here, who laid the train tracks, raised the bridges, picked the cotton and the lettuce, built brick by brick the glittering edifices they would then keep clean and work inside of. Praise song for struggle, praise song for the day, praise song for every hand-lettered sign, the figuring it out at kitchen tables. Some live by love thy neighbor as thyself. Others by first do no harm or take more than you need. What if the mightiest word is love? Love beyond marital, filial, national love that casts a widening pool of light. Love with no need to preempt grievance. In today's sharp sparkle, this winter air, anything can be made, any sentence begun, on the brink, on the brim, on the cusp. Praise song for the walking forward in that light. So this morning, let us remember and let us walk forward together.
Chalice, chalice, burning bright, help remind us with your light of how we'd like to live each day with love and truth helping lead the way.
Hi everyone, hope everyone is doing great on this Sunday. Today I'm sharing with you a piece by an artist that I really love. Her name is Maya Angelou, and the piece is titled Caged Bird. A free bird leaps on the back of the wind. And floats downstream till the current ends. And dips his wings in the orange sun rays and dares to claim the sky. The cage bird sings with a fearful trill of things unknown but longed for still. And his tune is heard on the distant hill, for the cage bird sings of freedom. The free bird thinks of another breeze, and the trade winds soft through the sighing trees. And the fat worms waiting on a dawn-bright lawn, and he names the sky his own. But the cage bird stands on the grave of dreams. His shouts on a nightmare scream. His wings are clipped and his feet are tied, so he opens his throat to sing. The cage bird sings with a fearful trill of things unknown but longed for still, and his tune is heard on a distant hill, for the cage bird sings of freedom.
For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. Oh, for each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. Oh, for each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. We are our grandmother's prayers, and we are our grandfather's dreamings, and we are the breath of our ancestors. We are the Spirit of God. We are mothers of courage, fathers of time, daughters of dust, and the sons of great visions. We're sisters of mercy, brothers of love, lovers of life, and the builders of nations. We're seekers of truth, keepers of faith, makers of peace, and the wisdom of ages. We are our grandmother's prayers. We are our grandfather's dreamings, and we are the breath of our ancestors. We are the Spirit of God. We are mothers of courage, fathers of time, daughters of dust, and the sons of great visions. We're sisters of mercy, brothers of love, lovers of life, and the builders of nations. We're seekers of truth and keepers of faith. We are makers of peace and the wisdom of ages. We are our grandmother's prayers. We are our grandfather's dreamings, and we are the breath of our ancestors. We are the Spirit of God. We are our grandmother's prayers, and we are our grandfather's dreamings. We are the breath of our ancestors. We are the Spirit of God. For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. We are one.
This is the time when we can send our earnest hopes or wishes, which some call prayers, to the people who we care about. I invite you to think about your relationship with this community and how it can support you in the good times and the not so good. Think about your hopes and your hurts and how sharing them with like-minded people can make you feel. Of course, in this COVID time, it's a little more difficult to get together. I hope by now you all have bubbles that you're safely contained within, and that you are able to reach out to other people by phone or by Zoom, and even in person, even in person if you can do so safely. My meditation today is called Dark and Light, and it's by Jackie James, and comes from a book called Been in the Storm So Long, which is a collection of writings by African-American Unitarian Universalist ministers. Blackmail, blacklist, black mark, Black Monday, black mood, black-hearted, black plague, black mass, black market. Good guys wear white, bad guys wear black. We fear black cats and the dark continent, but it's okay to tell a white lie. Lily white hands are coveted. It's great to be pure as the driven snow. Angels and brides wear white. Devil's food cake is chocolate. Angel's food cake is white. We shape language and we are shaped by it. In our culture, white is esteemed. It is heavenly, sunlike, clean, pure, immaculate, innocent, and beautiful. At the same time, black is evil, wicked, gloomy, depressing, angry, sullen. Ascribing negative and positive values to black and white enhances the institutionalization of this culture's racism. Let us acknowledge the negative connotations of whiteness. White things can be soft, vulnerable, pallid, and ashen. Light can be blinding, bleaching, enervating. Conversely, we must acknowledge that darkness has a redemptive character, that in darkness there is power and beauty. The dark nurtured and protected us before our birth. Welcome darkness. Do not be afraid of it or deny it. Darkness brings relief from the blinding sun, the scorching heat, from exhausting labor. Night signals permission to rest, to be with our loved ones, to conceive new life, to search our hearts, to remember our dreams. The dark of winter is a time of hibernation. Seeds grow in the dark, fertile earth. The words black and dark don't need to be destroyed or ignored, only balanced and reclaimed in their wholeness. The words white and light don't need to be destroyed or ignored, only balanced and reclaimed in their wholeness. Imagine a world that only had light or dark. We need both, dark and light, light and dark. Now is the time when people bring forth their personal joys and sorrows to share with the congregation. We do this by dropping stones into the water, and as the ripples disperse from where the stone comes in, they carry the wishes where people can be supported or congratulated, depending on the situation. The first stone today is for Tim and Michelle. Michelle is our financial officer, and her husband, Tim, has been in and out of hospital with infections, and then he had an allergic reaction to the medication. So hopefully he's now on the mend. From Irvin, birthday wishes to Anita, and also from Irvin, best wishes for Carlos in Mexico City, who is hospitalized with COVID. I will put a few stones in for all the people who are dealing with COVID, either personally or within their circles. Hopefully things will now start to get better. And on a positive note, in the COVID world, all the folks at Unitarian House got their vaccinations this week. So that's very positive news. Well, I put one last stone for all the joys and sorrows held within our hearts. Now we will have a moment of silence.
our lands. Peace unto you, peace unto me, peace unto all the world's family. So many people have helped shape our lives, striving for truth, they have lived and died. We remember their faces, we remember their names, we strive to continue what they strived to gain. Peace in our hearts, peace in our hands, peace in our lives, peace in our lands, peace unto you, peace unto me, peace unto all the world's family. We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. We shall live in peace. We shall live in peace. We shall live in peace someday. Deep in my heart, I do believe we shall live in peace someday. We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Peace unto you, peace unto me, peace unto all the world's family.
This morning's reading is adapted from Velma Morgan, an elementary teacher in Toronto. Black Canadians and Black people from around the world who have contributed to science, medicine, education, technology, and other fields. Trailblazers. Mathieu d'Acosta, a free man who was hired as a translator for Samuel de Champlain's 1605 excursion. Veterans. Stanley G. Grizzle, served in World War II and was a civil rights activist. Number 2 Construction Battalion, Captain Reverend William Andrew White. Scientists and engineers. Garrett A. Morgan, who designed the first traffic light. Sarah Boone, who invented the ironing board. Otis Boykin, who invented the artificial pacemaker control unit. George Washington Carver discovered hundreds of uses for the peanut. Elijah McCoy invented the automatic lubricator for steam engines. Daniel Hale William performed the first successful open heart surgery in 1893. Charles Drew developed improved techniques for blood storage and applied his expert knowledge to developing large-scale blood banks early in World War II. Politicians. Leonard Braithwaite, the first Black person in the Ontario legislature, called for an end to school segregation and for women to be pages in the Ontario legislature. Alvin Curling, Mary Ann Chambers, Senator Ann Cools, Senator Donald Oliver, Senator Don Meredith, Lincoln Alexander, former Governor General Michael Jean, Jean Augustine, Rosemary Brown, Zanana Akande, Howard McCurdy. Journalists and authors, Ita Sadhu, Austin Clark, Rachel Manley, Malcolm Gladwell, Royson James, Dwight Drummond, Andrea Case. Entrepreneurs, business people, Michael Lee Chin, Dolores Lawrence, Raymond Chang, Amin and Glenner Josephs of Kisco Products, Denham Jolly of Flow Radio. Then we have lawyers and fighters for justice. Julius Alexander Isaac was named Chief Justice of the Federal Court of Canada. He became the first Black Chief Justice in Canada and the first to serve on federal court. Former Deputy Chief Keith Ford of the Toronto Police. Deputy Chief of Police Peter Slawley. Mr. Justice Michael Tulloch. Teachers and professors, Dr. Jervin Ferron, President of Brandon University. Wilson O. Brooks, who was the first Black school principal in Toronto and possibly the city's first Black teacher, too. He began teaching in 1952. Dr. Afua Cooper, Dr. Avis Glaze, Dr. Carl James. Black history includes struggles, but it is also rich in accomplishments.
Last Sunday, I don't know if you were able to see it, but the Reverend Dr. Anthony Bailey from Parkdale United Church spoke as part of a series on the topic of racism, white privilege, and the invention of race. Dr. Bailey is the senior minister at Parkdale, and Friday's EUU has a link to his talk if you did miss it. One of the chilling things that he said was that the murder of George Floyd at the hands of police was not a one-off. Not a one-off just in the US, but in Canada as well. Like the States, in Canada, you can find lists of violent and questionable incidents involving the Indigenous, people of color, immigrants, and the police. Dr. Bailey is originally from Barbados, but he grew up in and around Montreal. He's no stranger to violence and hatred. When he and his brother were attending technical college in Montreal decades ago, they were the target of a racially motivated attack that ended up in the death of Dr. Bailey's brother. Not long ago, Parkdale United, which is just 10 minutes up the road from 30 Cleary, was also a target of racist and anti-Semitic graffiti in our own time. Racism isn't going away. On the contrary, hate crimes are on the rise in Canada. For the Indigenous and racialized groups, Jews and Muslims in Canada, well, as I should say that those are the rise in hate crimes, but for the Indigenous and racialized groups in Canada, there are disparities in education, earnings, housing, treatment by the criminal and social services system. COVID-19 has drawn attention to the disparities in healthcare. Last month, I shared with you a recent survey that indicates nearly half of Canadians believe that discrimination against Black people is no longer a problem, while 83% of Black Canadians say that it still is. The first of the 7 principles of the Unitarian Universalist congregations, those that we affirm and promote, the first one is the dignity and worth of every person. In the words of UU minister, theologian, and past president of our UU Theological School, Star King, where our intern minister, Ian Hill, just finished. In the words of Dr. Reverend Rebecca Parker, reverence and respect for human nature is at the core of Unitarian Universalist faith. Unitarian Universalists affirm the inherent worth and dignity of each person as a given in faith. An unshakable conviction calls us to self-respect and respect for others. And so any form of racism or bigotry should and does shake us to our very core. Yet the inheritance and specter of racism still hangs over and is in the very fabric of our culture and society. Since the turn of the year, I've been asking around among you, those of you not long out of school and those of you out of school very long now, what you know about Black Canadian history. And a few of you know quite a bit, but many of you had said you really hadn't learned much about Black history in school. So I've taken my own trip and time to discover what the road looked like to bring us to where we are today at this point in history for Black Canadians. This journey towards basic and human rights, equity, dignity, and worth. So we're going to take a look back and then look forward. Look back at some of the moments along the way. This is a very quick trip, given it covers 400 years or so. I'll be curious to learn whether there were some things new for you, and would love to hear if there's more we should add to the story. Now, the first Black person who appears in written records in what is now known as Canada was, as Sharmila mentioned, Matthew da Costa. As had been a century-old practice before him with Africans along the African coast, he was hired as a translator by European explorers and is reported to have been on our shores with various explorers starting around 1605 and died in Quebec City in 1618. It is believed that he was of African Portuguese descent and that he would have spoken Dutch, English, French, Portuguese, eventually Mi'kmaq, and the Pidgin Basque, which was used with the Indigenous for trading purposes. But soon after da Costa, most people of African origin, several thousand who came to what is now Canada, came as slaves. Both the British and the French colonies allowed slavery. What is amazing to consider is developing alongside the rise of revolutions of thought, rising democracies, the age of enlightenment. In the words of activist, social critic, and philosopher Cornel West, alongside the grand epoch of equality, liberty, and fraternity, and the rise of unparalleled power, wealth, and progress of European nations, all wrapped up in this was the development of a new and cruel form of slavery, chattel slavery, where new laws, mythologies, and mindsets were constructed to allow for monumental land grabs, and where men, women, and children could be considered goods like domestic animals that could be owned and traded as property with little chance of freedom, without any claim to the natural human rights espoused by the Enlightenment. We know that slavery existed in ancient times, enslaving people for their labor as the result of war, debt, and the punishment of crimes. Although the lives of these slaves could be very harsh, they often were no more harsh or better than the lives of peasants and the other laborers of their time. And they may have owned some land, earned some wages, and their master didn't automatically claim the slave's children for theirs. Like indentured servants, they may have been able to earn their freedom through their labor or through a change of hands in whoever was the ruler. Before the conquest of the so-called New World, slaves became slaves because of circumstance, not because of race or the color of their skin. As far as we know, categorizing people into races was a concept that arose, again, like I said, alongside the age of enlightenment and exploration. Before the 1400s, the 1500s, people in Europe were, of course, aware of other people with different color skin and physical features. But the features that mattered were those of country or territory, religion, and the rise of religion because of the rise of Christianity, and class. A merchant was a merchant, whether they had a white face or a black or brown face. But a peasant or a slave was a slave, whether they had a white face, a black or a brown face. Something started happening in the New World, in the conquest of the New World. These lands, these vast lands and riches that were promised, these storied resources like gold, something happened in the conquest of the New World. In 1452, with the church's blessing, a pope no less, the church started giving the religious groundings for European nations, first Portugal, through apostolic authority, no less, the power to, and this comes from the first papal bull about this, after the Crusades, the power to invade, conquer, fight, subjugate Muslims and pagans and other infidels and other enemies of Christ, and wherever establish their kingdoms, duchies, royal palaces, principalities, and other dominions, lands, places, estates, camps, and any other possessions, mobile and immobile goods, found in all these places and held in whatever name, and held and possessed by the same, and to lead their persons in perpetual servitude. The world's wide open to you, says the Pope. Then in 1493, Pope Alexander VI reaffirmed this, giving the right for explorers and European nations to lay claim on lands unknown to Christians. Now, there was a pope in there that said that slavery wasn't good. Somehow that wasn't raised up. They had this original doctrine of discovery. The Europeans believed that God had given them what they called the New World, even though it wasn't new to the millions of people who had already lived there for thousands of years, and that they were given the right to not only control the land, but to have power over all its people and all its resources. They felt they had carte blanche to take over the lands of any non-Christians. They had rights over others because they were Christian. And they discovered things like sugar in the West Indies and the vast lands in North America. To create the kind of unlimited wealth desired by the explorers and their backers, they knew they needed to create a large, cheap labor force. And look what they found when I got to those lands. They found cheap laborers. They could easily dominate, they felt. They took a burgeoning slave trade in Africa and shipped all those people over to the New World. They called the people that they found, they called the people of Africa heathen, childlike, savage. And I can't read my notes. And during the Enlightenment, especially during the 1700s, that's when the theories of race began to emerge. As thinkers like Kant wrote, humanity exists in its greatest perfection in the white race. This was a new idea. The yellow Indians have a smaller amount of talent. The Negroes are lower, and lowest are the American peoples. The Europeans created a system to disempower the indigenous and black Africans, and then based theories of race upon and to justify that system. By the time Mathieu de Costa arrived in New France, Europeans had begun the practice of using enslaved indigenous peoples, people of African descent, and European indentured servants as their labor force. Enslaved Africans first arrived in British North America, at the time was now what we call the United States, first arrived in 1619. And the first enslaved African that we have a name for, who arrived in New France, was a 6-year-old boy named Oliver, who took on the last name Lejeune of one of his many owners. In 1628 he arrived, as far as we know. In the beginning, enslaved and indentured labor often worked together and commingled socially. At first, enslavement in the New World was like it had been historically. It was not a lifetime condition, and it wasn't inherited by your children, and you might be able to buy yourself or labor with your work, have eventual freedom. But during the 17th century, utilizing indentured servants became less profitable. Colonists had to make a choice. They could use laborers who might one day buy their freedom, or keep generations of people enslaved and their children indefinitely. European settlers increasingly turned to enslaved Africans for labor and created laws where the children of slaves became the owner's property. When New France was taken by the British in 1759, 3,600 to 4,000 enslaved people had lived in the settlement. The vast majority was indigenous, but many were of African descent as well. In what became British North America, in now what we call Canada, slavery continued with black slaves, over time pretty much replacing the indigenous slaves. Slave ownership was found at every level of colonial Canadian society, whether French or English, working on farms, in bakery shops, working in leather tanning, orderlies in hospitals, working for merchants, working in the fur trade. Although there was a smaller number of slaves in what is Canada than the United States, they still were treated as nothing more than property, were severely punished if they were defiant. Sexual abuse was always a threat. There are records of hangings, beatings, torture. We know that eventually slaves were coming to Canada for haven through the Underground Railroad from the United States. But in 1777, when the state of Vermont abolished slavery, slaves from what is now Canada escaped to Vermont. During the American Revolution, the British did promise land, freedom, and rights to slaves and free blacks for services rendered. Some of the black loyalists who reached Nova Scotia belonged to the Company of Negroes that had left Boston with the British troops. Although Nova Scotia became a haven for black loyalists, actually, the first race riot in North America didn't happen in the States. It occurred in Shelburne County, Nova Scotia. How did that happen, right? Many of the land grants that were promised by the British never materialized or were in less desirable locations than the land given to white loyalists. With no land and hardly any possessions, many black loyalists were exploited as a source of free labor for the provincial government. In some cases, they were forced into what was like indentured servitude in conditions that were startlingly similar to the slavery from which they had escaped. Others were kidnapped and sold back into the slave system in the United States or as far away as the Caribbean. But the white loyalists who fled also to the same area in Nova Scotia also came with hardly any money or possessions after the Britain's defeat in the States. Their land grants were delayed, and they were forced to work as laborers and compete for work with the black loyalists. Racial tension arose. On July 26, 1784, and continuing for 10 days, a mob of white loyalists, armed with hooks and chains seized from ships, beat black loyalists and tore down many of their homes. A large complement of British soldiers were necessary, and a naval frigate were eventually brought into the town to maintain order. In the face of widespread discrimination, many black loyalists were convinced they would never find true freedom and equality in Nova Scotia. When they were offered the opportunity to leave the colony in the 1790s, almost 1,200 blacks left Halifax to relocate to Sierra Leone. Attitudes about slavery, a good thing, were beginning to change toward the end of the 1700s. First in 1793 in Upper Canada, now Ontario, that's where the first Anti-Slavery Act was passed. The law freed enslaved people aged 25 and over and made it illegal to bring enslaved people into Upper Canada. On Prince Edward Island, the complete abolition of slavery was pronounced in 1825, 9 years before slavery was abolished throughout the British Empire in 1834. Between 1815 and 1865, because of these attitudes and laws abolishing slavery, tens of thousands of African Americans sought refuge in Upper and Lower Canada through the legendary Underground Railroad. Canada became the setting for speakers and organizations speaking against or for the abolition of slavery in the United States. But not all went well for Black Canadians following that time. Tension arose wherever Black immigrants settled, with competition for land and jobs, and the continuing belief that Black people were inferior. In the early 1900s, Canadian officials worked to limit Black settlement in and immigration to Canada, Black and other racialized peoples. Immigration reform against racial discrimination didn't come fully until the 1960s. The Ku Klux Klan or the KKK made their way to Canada in the early 1900s, and incidents continue to this day. During World War II, at first Black volunteers were rejected, but eventually accepted into the Army with some segregation. It took decades for Black Canadians to earn the right to unionize. Ontario was the first province to pass a Racial Discrimination Act as early as 1944, or maybe as late as 1944. However, Black discrimination continued in the 1950s despite the legislation. Blacks might have been refused service in restaurants, and we probably are aware of Viola Desmond and what she experienced. And it seemed that even with the law, there were still stories of segregation and discrimination. The Canadian Human Rights Act was enacted in 1977, and the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms in 1982. It was quite a long road. Charmaine Nelson, a Black Canadian educator and art historian, writes, "The stories of good white Canadians as the saviors of fearful, hunted, and tormented African American fugitives fits neatly into our national identity as a racially tolerant, multicultural society. But this country was itself founded upon the strategic exploitation of certain populations. Canada, in other words, is a country that was built on large-scale racism. Thousands had their lives, health, hopes, cultures, families, and dreams stolen from them, while laboring tirelessly for the betterment and prosperity of a white elite." Charmaine continues, "Although slavery was abolished by British Parliament in 1833, racism persisted in Canada. The structural inequities, equalities that sustained slavery for 400 years could not be abolished by a mere act of legislation. They lived on in the hearts and minds of white Canadians who fought to retain sole control of political, legal, social, and cultural institutions. It would take more than a century after the abolition of slavery to outlaw racial discrimination. The legacy of slavery and racism persists." Charmaine adds, "Black Canadians are regularly treated as outsiders and subjected to unjust employment tactics, unequal access to health care and housing, police brutality, and over-policing, despite the fact that many white Canadians associate such realities as only being in the United States. Black Canadians with no history of criminal convictions are 3 times as likely to be arrested by Toronto police for possession of small amounts of marijuana, 3 times more than white people with similar backgrounds. Black people make up less than 10% of Toronto's population, but they account for at least half of all people killed by the police since the 1980s. Reverend Judith E. Meyer suggests that as Unitarian Universalists, our job is to identify the social injustices of our day and do what we can to overcome them. This work begins with some soul-searching and some questions. Have we become complacent or worse, complicit in perpetuating oppression? What do we need to learn to live up to our own UU principles? Reverend Dr. Bailey, in his talk last week, suggests that yes, we should be allies, but we should move to becoming accomplices in this struggle for rights and equity. Reverend Pam Rumasek reminds us that as UUs, our one issue is holding up and affirming the value of every person. Our one issue is love, in whatever way we can offer it in a wild and hurting world. So may we love one another. This is our one issue. And let us sing, "Shine on Me."
Hello, UU family. I'm going to sing a song with you called Shine on Me. It's an amazing spiritual that anybody can sing. And in these days when the things that we're dealing with, the feeling separate and all of that, and things seem so hard, this is one of those songs that you just throw your head back, put it in your medicine kit. All you have to do is ask. And here's how it goes. Shine on me, oh shine on me. Let the light from the lighthouse shine on me, oh shine on me. Yes, shine on me. Let the light from the lighthouse shine on me. Lift me up, oh, lift me up. Let the light from the lighthouse lift me up, oh, lift me up. Yes, lift me up. Let the light from the lighthouse lift me up. Oh, hold me close. Yes, hold me close. Let the light from the lighthouse hold me close. Yes, hold me close. Oh, hold me close. Let the light from the lighthouse, please hold me close. Oh, shine on me, shine on me. Yes, shine on me. Let the light from the lighthouse shine on me. Oh, shine on me. Yes, shine on me. Let the light from the lighthouse shine on me.
This is a time in our service that we usually accept the offering. You may go to our website or contact our finance manager to find out how you might keep up with your pledge or make a donation during these times. We give these gifts freely. We receive these gifts gratefully. We dedicate these gifts to the work of our congregation, serving human wholeness, caring for the planet, upholding religious freedom, welcoming the stranger, loving one another.
Before extinguishing the chalice, I read the end of Maya Angelou's poem, A Brave and Startling Truth. We, this people, on this wayward, floating body, created on this earth, of this earth, have the power to fashion for the earth a climate where every man and every woman, every person, can live freely without sanctimonious piety, without crippling fear. When we come to it, we must confess that we are the possible, we are the miraculous, the true wonder of this world, This is when and only when we come to it. May we make it so. May we join together and be accomplices in the struggle for peace and justice. May we go in peace, go in joy, go in love.